Okay, picture this. You're right in the middle of a seriously intense debate, right? And you have just laid out what is, frankly, a flawless argument. You've brought the verified data, you've clearly mapped out the logic, and you're just sitting there fully expecting the other person to concede the point. But instead of actually engaging with your carefully laid out facts, what do? They instantly shift the goalposts. They completely ignore the evidence you just put right in front of them, and they just double down on their original, completely unverified claim. It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it?
Honestly, arguing with someone who's actively rejecting reality feels exactly like talking to a brick wall. And the terrifying truth we're exploring in today's Explainer, you probably are doing exactly that. So, welcome back to the Matrix of Critical Thinking. Today, we're focusing on decoding the absolute ultimate BS detector. We're going to dismantle that toxic logic that makes arguments feel literally impossible, figure out exactly why our brains reject hard facts, and look at the framework you need to completely bulletproof your own mind. Let's get into it.
Starting with Section 1, the problem. The defense attorney brain.
Now, we all like to think we walk into situations completely open-minded, ready to absorb new facts like a sponge. But here's the hard truth. Nobody actually wants to admit that they walk into almost every situation already holding incredibly rigid opinions. Whether we're talking about politics, other people, or, even pizza toppings, we do not start with a blank slate. The reality is, your brain isn't inherently in the business of questioning your opinions, it's in the business of defending them. Notice how this totally reframes a term you've probably heard a million times: confirmation bias. Think of your brain acting like a slightly shady defense attorney who only takes cases they absolutely know they can win. It doesn't actively go looking for the objective truth. No, it just hunts down the exact pieces of evidence that prove you are already correct all along. And this illustrates the exact problem this defense attorney brain creates. Because of this built-in bias, we are constantly confusing assertions with verification. An assertion, like we see over on the left, is really just a statement claiming something is true, relying purely on the fact that you said it out loud. Literally anyone can make an assertion. But true critical thinking, that requires verification. This is the actual, rigorous process of confirming whether that claim is genuinely correct using objective, independent evidence.
So let me ask you a brutally honest question, and I want you to really think about this for a second. When was the last time you actually read an entire article that completely contradicted your deeply held political views? Here is a huge reality check. Studies show that when we encounter disagreeing evidence, we will typically skim it in about 4 seconds. Just 4 seconds. Yet we will happily sit there and spend 20 minutes nodding along to a piece of content that validates exactly what we already believe. Our brain's lazy efficiency is just incredibly powerful. Which brings us to Section 2, the agitation, the evolutionary threat response. To understand why arguments feel so intensely personal, we actually have to look at the underlying biology. See, for most of human history, being rejected by your social group didn't just mean you were unpopular, it meant exile. And exile was an absolute death sentence. Because of that ancient hardware that is literally still running right now in your modern brain, your amygdala, which is your brain's threat detection system, has a major glitch. It honestly cannot cleanly distinguish between a physical threat to your survival, like a saber-toothed tiger attack, and someone aggressively disagreeing with your tax policy. To your brain, a threat is a threat. So what happens in your body when someone challenges your publicly held beliefs? The physical symptoms kick in immediately. Your shoulders tighten up, your chest closes, your heart rate skyrockets, and most importantly, your reasoning quality instantly plummets. You are absolutely no longer evaluating the logical merits of an argument. As far as your nervous system is concerned, you're just blindly protecting your territory from a deadly threat.
So the crucial point is what happens next. The very moment we are thrust into this mild evolutionary threat response, we experience a complete and total loss of what psychologists call critical mindedness. Critical mindedness is that beautiful, fundamental willingness to challenge prevailing norms and objectively evaluate the evidence sitting right in front of you. But when our beliefs are challenged, boom, that critical mindedness totally vanishes. We stop being truth seekers and we immediately start being territory defenders.
Without that critical mindedness, instead of seeking actual verification, the threatened brain does something really fascinating. It retreats entirely into unfalsifiable claims. We essentially make this subconscious decision that we are going to believe our opinion no matter what happens, and no matter what contradictory evidence is presented to us. It becomes this mental fortress that absolutely no logic is allowed to penetrate. Which leads us to, well, let's call it what it is, a massive psychological reality check.
If you're in a debate and your opponent literally cannot name a single piece of evidence that would prove their position wrong, they aren't engaged in an argument. Their belief is entirely unfalsifiable. And that is really just a polite academic way of saying they have stopped thinking entirely, and they are now just using a psychological coping mechanism. They just happen to be doing it with a very confident posture.
So how do we fix this? Section 3, the solution, the epistemic accountability framework. How do we bypass this deeply ingrained evolutionary biology? How do we defeat that shady defense attorney living inside our own heads? Because, make no mistake, critical thinking is not natural. It goes against every single cognitive shortcut evolution handed us. So we can't just rely on instinct. We have to deliberately deploy a highly effective system. Enter epistemic accountability. This framework is broken down into 3 distinct steps that bypass our ego and force us into a space of actual logic and reason. Let's break down exactly how these work.
Step 1 is, hands down, the absolute greatest BS detector ever created. It's a simple, deeply uncomfortable 4-word cheat code. What would change my mind? If you are arguing with someone, stop and ask them exactly what evidence it would take for them to shift their position. If they look at you and say nothing, if literally no data, no study, no fact could change their view, the debate is over. You win. They have just admitted on the record that they aren't using logic.
Now, asking that 4-word question immediately initiates step 2, force the verification. When you ask what would change their mind, you're forcing their brain to define what their belief is actually built on. Is it built on rigorously verified independent evidence, or is it just an empty assertion? Is it just some unchecked rumor they heard back in 2014 and never bothered to fact-check? This forces the entire conversation completely out of the realm of empty assertions.
Finally, we reach step 3, embrace the update. This is all about treating intellectual humility not as some fixed personality trait you're either born with or not, but as a highly trainable skill. Look, most people experience the act of updating their beliefs as a humiliating defeat. They frame shifting their views as a sign of weakness or being inconsistent. But true critical thinkers know that holding on to an unverified assertion just to save face, that is the real weakness.
Honestly, here is your ultimate psychological cheat code for absolute intellectual dominance. Epistemologically updating your beliefs in response to new, verified evidence is not a weakness. It is the literal definition of functioning correctly as a thinking organism. When you separate your core identity from your passing ideas, and when you value truth over your own ego, you aren't losing. You are just running a massively superior operating system compared to the person arguing with a brick wall. A genuine master of debate has a well-developed disposition to engage in objective reason assessment. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this provocation. What would change your mind on the topics you hold most dear? I challenge you to turn this ultimate BS detector on yourself today. Continue to demand verification over assertion, and please, separate your identity from your ideas. Keep questioning, keep decoding the logic around you, and I will see you in the next explainer.